Welcome back to The Wheel on the School, Chapter 14. Chapter 14, The Tots in the Tower. In the morning the storm was over, that is, well enough over for the fishermen to go out in the early hours to test the royally lashing sea. All of shore was astir. Although it was 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a light in every window. The fishermen were taking no chances. The ebb tide was due at 4 o'clock. If the storm was no longer strong enough to hold the ebb tide water to the dike, their anchored boats would be left high and dry. The wind still blew. The sea still stormed against the dike, but the sound of voices and the clatter of wooden shoes was in the street. Doors slammed. Shouts came from the dike. It was the last-minute excitement of casting off for sea. Wives would not see their husbands again for weeks, while the men in their little fishing boats would be out on the treacherous North Sea. The fishermen wouldn't wait for the storm to calm down still more. If we'd wait for every 2-cent storm, we'd always be sitting on the dike, Yella's father shouted as a farewell when the dinghy left his fishing boat to return to the dike. 3 women rowed it back. This time the dinghy had to be left behind. The sea was too roiled to risk hoisting it on board the boat of Yella's father to serve as a lifeboat for the little fishing fleet. The children had slept through all the turmoil of the preparation and departure. They woke up at their usual school time to find that their homes in the village had gone back to the normal pattern of life. No fathers, just mothers and their children. It seemed very natural. Things were back in their groove. But this morning the departure of the fishermen signified one added and important thing: the end to the storm. Clothes hastily thrown on, breakfast gulped, all the children instinctively did the same thing. Before setting out for school, they raced to the top of the high dike. There they found each other, and there they stood dismayed. The sea still roiled, the waves still leaped. After their first disappointment, the little group on the dike realized there was a difference. As the children of fishermen, they sensed it. The fishing fleet was long since out of sight. It must be far beyond the islands that now appeared as dark masses in the distance and then fell back into the tossing sea again. An old black steamer wallowed and plunged this side of the islands. But here against the dike, the waves were not washing quite so high. The thin licks of the breakers did not hiss and boil as fearfully up the slope of the dike as they had yesterday. The eyes of all the children went to the high scudding clouds far away over the sea. Out there under the clouds, halfway to the plunging steamer, a sea eagle was rising and falling on windy currents of air. A sea eagle, a bird! But where were the gulls? The seashore without gulls seemed wrong. Maybe a sea eagle could ride the rough winds, but the gulls had not yet returned. The storm had taken them far inland. Then the children heard the great bronze bell in the village tower. It was 8 o'clock. The school teacher was ringing the bell. It was summoning the farm workers round about Shora home for breakfast. It was the end of their first 4-hour shift. Even the bell sounded different this morning. Under the wind, the peals of the bell sounded solemn and sweet as they lifted over the dike. The children listened. The storm is over, is almost over. The bell seemed to sing the powerful song with a great promise of hopeful, sunshiny days to come, of great things ahead. But the boys and Lena could stay no longer on the dike. Now it was school time. They were supposed to be at the door of the school when the teacher returned from ringing the tower bell that called the workers home from the fields. The children raced each other down the dike. The clouds scudded far overhead, but the children of shore laughed and shouted in the street as they raced each other to school. The teacher left the heavy iron door at the foot of the tower wide open. He didn't have to close it now against the raw gusts of salty wind and the spray that had leaped the dike these many days. He tugged at the bell rope and looked out the open door. The crisp, clean look of the windswept village square held his attention. The storm was going over. The air was fresh again. He rang the bell harder. The great tower filled with the solemn hum of the bell. He stopped at last. Slowly, the echoes of the bell seeped out of the big stone room. Then the tower was silent, except for the loud ticking of the huge clock in a loft far above him. The teacher stood listening to the ticking of the clock. To his expert ear, the sound was not right. A little off beat. He bit his lower lip in vexation, remembering that he hadn't wound the clock all the days of the storm. He realized he had let it go too long. If he did climb up now and wind the clock, it would stop in an hour or so. He looked out the door. The children were gone from the dike. They'd be waiting for him at the school. Well, they'd have to wait a little longer while he climbed up to the loft and wound the clock. Waiting for school to open must be one thing a child could be patient about. Maybe the only thing. The teacher started climbing the first long ladder. As he crossed over the floor of the first loft to the next ladder, he heard the voices of children in the square below the tower. The smaller children, with tiny shrill voices. The mothers must have got the small fry out of the houses almost as soon as the school children. Down below, the teacher had left the iron door to the tower wide open. The gate to the churchyard around the tower stood open. Linda, Lena's little sister, had found Yann, Auka's little brother. Yann was her special little playmate. Linda had a great plan. She and Yann were going to make a daisy chain. She had seen her sister Lena do it. It was easy. Other small children were playing in the village square before the churchyard. They wanted Linda and Yann to come, but Linda and Yann were going to make a daisy chain. Yann didn't know what a daisy chain was, but Linda would show him. "Come on, Yann." She went through the gate into the churchyard. They had never been there alone before. Always the gate was closed. Somehow what she was doing seemed forbidden, a little bit wrong. "Come on, Yann." Yann obediently followed her through the gate. They found 2 daisies behind the first gravestone and crouched down to pick them. Hidden by the stone, they were immediately forgotten by the other little children in the square in the excitement of their own play. Linda found 3 more half-open daisies. They wandered on toward the tower. Yann was the first to see that the tower door stood wide open. It intrigued him. It was much more interesting than daisies, and they needed, 100, Linda had said. Yann had no idea what 100 was, but it sounded like a pailful. Yann tiptoed into the tower. Immediately the silence and the gloom of the cold ancient stone room frightened him. He ran out. "Come on, Linda, look in here. Oh, it's big." With 5 daisies clutched in her hand, Linda came. Side by side, they went into the tower. They stopped before the bell rope, awed and a little scared, but the outer door stood wide open and there was light from the doorway. The comforting sounds of the other children, playing in the windy square, came to them. Along one side of the stone room was a cage with bars. It intrigued Linda. There was an old bear cot in the back of the cage. It was suspended from the wall by 2 heavy chains. Suddenly Linda remembered. This was the jail where they put bad men. She told Yann. They both breathed heavily. But outside, the other children were yelling nice and loud, and through the open door they could see the dike. "Sometimes, when I'm real bad, my mother says that she's going to put me in there," Yann whispered. "She won't, though, will she?" "Oh, no," Linda assured him, her lips quivering. She knew the same threat only too well. They retreated farther from the bars. There was a noise above them. Linda looked toward it. Up the shaft of dim light with the many ladders going up in the tower, Linda saw legs coming down a ladder. Look, Yann. Now footsteps were right overhead. A little dust sifted down in their upturned faces. Then the legs were thrust through the trapdoor opening into the big stone room. Breathlessly, Linda pulled Yann behind the big iron door. He was so slow. It was the teacher up there. The teacher of Lena and all the older boys was coming down the ladder. An awesome man, high and mighty, and scary to a little girl who did not go to school. Linda put her hand over Yann's mouth. He was so silly, he might say things. The door behind which they were hiding pulled away from in front of them. It clanged shut. A key grated in the lock. There was no other sound. There was darkness except for a small, feeble square of light filtering down from the higher lofts in the tower. It fell on the bars of the cage. They were locked in the tower, in the dark stone room with the jail for big, bad men, and the teacher was gone. Yann began to cry. Linda, almost crying herself, tried to comfort him. Yann pushed her away. I want my mother, he wailed. That unnerved Linda. Right then, there was nothing in all the world that she wanted more than her mother. The light filtered down on the bars of the cell. Linda stared at them with big eyes. She swallowed the beginning of a sob. Let's climb up, she urged. Oh, we can see everything from up there, the houses and even the islands in the sea. She promised Yann all the good things she could think of because she was promising them to herself. She was afraid of the cell and the bars, but she couldn't tell Yann that. Up there in the tower it was light. Up there wouldn't be a cage. Yann did not want to climb. He wanted his mother. Linda pushed him toward the ladder. I'll climb right up behind you, then you can't fall, she told him. She kept her eyes turned away from the bars and almost lifted Yann up on the ladder. Yann had to concentrate on spanning the space from rung to rung with his short, fat legs. He couldn't concentrate and cry and want his mother all at the same time. He climbed. Little sobs still came pushing out of him with the effort, but Linda crowded on behind him to get away from the cell and bars behind her in the dark room. The two tots climbed toward the light. When at last they pulled themselves through the trapdoor opening, there was just a loft with another long rickety ladder. But here there was light. The light streamed through a window-like opening far too high for them to look out, but here there was no cell with bars. They held hands, awed by the stillness and the strangeness of the place. Through the high opening no sound came. No sound now of other children playing in the square. The world and the village seemed far away and gone. They looked at the ladder leading to the next higher loft. Maybe we can see the houses and everything if we climb up there, Linda whispered. Yann shook his head. He wanted no more climbing of ladders. Suddenly he ran back to the yawning trapdoor in the floor. Down below lay darkness, a bottomless black hole. Yann stood petrified on the edge of the opening, staring down in horror at the floating darkness below him. He backed away. He turned and ran across the loft to the next ladder. They laboriously climbed the next shaky ladder in the same way they had done before. Linda pressing on tightly behind Yann, her face almost pushing against Yann's wooden shoes. Then Yann lost one of his wooden shoes. It bounced off Linda's shoulder and clattered to the floor below. Yann started to cry. He wanted his shoe. But Linda didn't know how to go backward down the ladder. She kicked off both her shoes to make him feel better. Yann kicked off his other shoe. They found they could climb much better in their thick woolen socks. But now Yann wanted to go back to get all the shoes. Linda pressed on. Yann had to climb. Again, there was only another loft when they pulled through the trapdoor, and again the window-like opening was far too high for them to look out. They could not see the houses and the islands in the sea as Linda had promised. Yann began to sob bitterly. Linda had said... For some reason, Yann went stubbornly of his own accord to the next ladder and started to climb. Linda had to hurry up after him. The dry sobs pressed out of Yann like hiccups, and he pulled himself through the next trapdoor. The last sob stopped in his mouth. Before him rose the enormous works of the tower clock. They had reached the clock loft. The clock ticked at them. Yann stared round-eyed at the great coppery wheels and cogs. This time Yann urged Linda on. He was awed by the slow-moving wheels and the heavy ticking. There came a whirring high up in the machinery, and the clock struck one mighty bong. It was the half hour. It hurt my ears when it bonged, Yann said, delighted. He was amazed and thrilled. He grabbed hold of the iron framework as if to climb up into the works. Linda dragged him back. You mayn't go up there, she said primly. Oh, will your mother? She couldn't finish her threat. It reminded her of her own mother and of her own wrongdoing in going into the tower. Let's go up some more, then we'll see the islands, she promised hastily to get the guilty thought of her mother out of her mind. All right, Yann said surprisingly. He was beginning to obey Linda as if she were his mother. After Yann pushed himself through the trapdoor into the loft above, he stayed kneeling on the floor. What's that? He said. It was the bell, the great, enormous bronze bell that they had heard every day, all the days of their short lives. Now its size awed and astounded them. There it hung before them from thick beams in the ceiling. It was so large it barely cleared the floor. Yann crawled to the bell and looked under it. There in the middle of the huge dome hung the big clapper. Yann suddenly lay down flat on his back and pulled himself by the rim of the bell to get under it and at the clapper. It fascinated him. Linda stood staring at Yann's 2 feet. It alarmed her. Yann was under the bell. She grabbed his feet and tried to pull him back into view. Yann was immovable as he clung to the clapper. You've got to come out, Linda cried desperately. I don't want to, Yann yelled back. His voice came seeping out from under the bell, so odd and muffled it frightened Linda. Oh, Yann, she quickly invented. You can see everything from here, the whole village and the roofs and even the islands. I don't want to, Yann said from under the bell. But you can even see storks flying in the sky, Linda said. She waited hopefully. She had heard so much about storks these last days that surely storks must be the ultimate in promises, something that would make Yann come sliding out. Yann did not bother to answer. His silence made Linda feel guilty. She had made it all up. She had fibbed. For the first time, she took her eyes off Yann's protruding feet and looked around her guiltily, as if someone might have heard her fibs. It was so. She hadn't fibbed. She could see out of the tower. Here, where the great bell hung, the tower was open on 3 sides. Low openings, great big window-like openings with slanting boards in them. She could peek between the boards, and there was the sky and the faraway sea and even the islands. At the end of an island, a lighthouse rose white above the dark rolling sea, but there were no storks. Linda looked back at the bell. She wanted to call Yann out from there, but she had fibbed about the storks. She stared hard into the distances of the sea again, as if to make storks happen. Her big sister Lena had talked about nothing but storks. She'd said there wouldn't be one stork left after the storm. Oh, but Lena had fibbed too. There were storks. 2 storks were coming over the sea. 2 big storks, slow and flappy. Far away over the sea toward the lighthouse, just as white as the lighthouse. Now they were coming down. The storks had landed in the sea. They weren't flying anymore. There they stood, far away, but not so far as the lighthouse. The storks stood in the sea. Yann had come to see, had to come to see them. Linda tiptoed to the bell, grabbed Yann's feet, and dragged him out before he had a chance to cling to the clapper. See, see? Linda pointed the storks out to Yann. She even held his head between her hands so he'd look in the right direction. That white in the sea? Yann asked. 2 whites? Are they storks? Sure. They were flying, but now they're just standing in the sea. I told you. I see them. The motionless storks were hard to see, and motionless, they weren't fascinating very long. Yann went back to the bell to try to swing the big, heavy clapper. There was a knock on the schoolroom door, but before the teacher could reach the door, it flew open. Lena's and Aka's mothers stood there. Maybe we shouldn't, Lena's mother started. Teacher, Yann and Linda are gone. We've hunted all over. Her voice was loud and desperate in the schoolroom. Her scared eyes sought out Lena. Lena, you've got to come. I don't know where to look anymore. You too, Aka, come. Aka's mother said timidly. Then she began to cry. We'll all come, the teacher said promptly. If we all take part, we can go out in all directions. We let them out at school time. We each thought they were next door at the other's house, Aka's mother said helplessly. Lena's mother nodded along with her. Linda, that's Lena's little sister, was talking about storks. She's heard Lena worry about the storks in the storm, and now we're afraid they went out into the country to look for storks. And the ditch is brimful along every road. They're not in the village. I've been to every house. She couldn't stand still any longer. She turned and ran out of the room. Aka's mother ran after her. I'll go with the women. A man along will make them feel better, the teacher said hurriedly. Each of you take the same road you took to find a wheel, but 2 of you go along the sea and the dike. He rushed out after the women. It must be serious if the teacher dismissed school, Lena thought, and bit her lip nervously. Yella did all the directing. She tagged mutely, almost gratefully after him when he said, You and I'll take the dike, Lena. Yella walked fast along the top of the dike. Lena ran silently on behind him. The running on the wind-swept dike left her no breath for talk. She just let Yella talk. He seemed to feel important in being head of a scouting party. It wasn't his little sister was gone. Yella, in his importance, seemed to lose sight of the reason they were on the dike. Now he was looking out to sea. We don't have to look for storks for the next few days, he decided expertly. The storm is still blowing itself out over England. Lena felt scornful. Yella hadn't the slightest idea which way England lay. Yella was the poorest in geography in the whole class. Then Lena felt anxious again and trotted faster. She wished it could have been Aka with her instead of Yella. Aka's little brother Yann was lost too. Only then they'd both be too anxious. No, maybe it was better getting irritated by Yella, because then you thought other thoughts than the awful thought of Linda and Yann floating in a ditch full of water. Lena threw a hasty glance up at the tower clock. 10 o'clock almost. 2 hours Linda and Yann had been gone. Yella had opinions on the tower too. The teacher shouldn't have gone off with your mother and Aka's. He should have rung the bell. Then all the country people would come to the village, and they all could help look. Most likely, if those two kids wandered on into the country, somebody working on the land would have seen them. Teacher couldn't do that, Lena said hotly. He mayn't. Why was she so irritated with Yella? You know the government sets the times he must ring the tower bell. Why, they'd all come running thinking something terrible had happened, like a fire or something. Isn't this terrible enough? Yella argued. Two little kids may be drowned. Oh, he shouldn't have said that, Yella realized too late. He heard Lena gasp. They'll be playing somewhere, locked up or something. You'll see, he added hastily. Let's hurry, Lena said. They raced out of the village in the direction of old Dalwa's turned-up boat. Just beyond the village, the remnants of an ancient, dilapidated pier jutted a short way into the sea. All that was left of it was a row of jagged, uneven piles sticking above the water like the worn teeth in an old man's mouth. But it was a temptation for children to crawl over the jagged piles to the pier's end. There were dangerous gaps in the pier and jagged holes where piles were missing. Oh, but Linda and Yann were too young to go out on the pier and jump the gaps, Lena tried to reassure herself. She just thought the thought, and there... She grabbed Yella's arm and stood pointing speechless. Something white floated on the water in a gap between the piles. Something white. White! Oh, but the children wouldn't be wearing white, not in winter. It was awful how you scared when you were worried and anxious. It's nothing, she managed to say. I thought I saw... She didn't explain. Her relief left her body too limp for talk. Oh, it was nothing, she gratefully said again. Yella was still looking where she'd pointed. Nothing, Yella said indignantly. It's storks, drowned storks. He sprinted to the pier. Lena couldn't run after him. Her whole body felt loose and disjointed in her relief after her big scare. Oh, how that floating white had scared her. Yella had said storks. Lena found herself running. When she got to the foot of the row of piles, Yella was racing over them, jumping the gaps. Now he stretched long and flat and let himself hang down. They were drowned storks. One after the other, Yella pulled them up by their dead wings and laid them on the piles. A somber Yella came slowly back to Lena, a stork dangling wet and lifeless from each hand. And Yann said, Yella was almost crying, but it was the newspaper that was right. They drowned in the sea, and there won't be any storks. Come on, we've got to find the teacher. Show him. But Linda and Yann. Oh, yes. Yella looked down at the storks. Yeah, that's right. He stood torn between his duty and his need to show the teacher and the other boys his awful find. He half stooped as if to lay the two storks down on the dike. You go on, he suddenly said. I'll run and find the teacher. I can run like anything. I'll come right back. He didn't wait. Holding the storks high by their long legs, he stormed up the dike and ran hard along the path. Lena stood staring forlornly after Yella. She half turned as if to go on alone. Her skirts fluttered in the wind. She could hear the lonely sound. The finding of the dead storks, Yella's desertion, the loneliness of the sweep of windy dike and sea, it was all suddenly too much. She whirled and tore after Yella. Yella, wait! Yella! She sounded so sharp and shrill. Yella must have thought she had found Linda and Yann, maybe drowned too. He stopped and then came running, the dead stork still in his hand. He stopped again and waited for Lena opposite the tower. Now there was her sister Lena running back to that big Yella again. Yella had run away from her with the storks, but those weren't the storks that had come flying over the sea. Yella and Lena had gone and pulled the wrong storks out of the water. Linda, up in the tower, peered excitedly between the louver boards of the big opening in the bell loft. Yella and Lena got two storks on the dike, and I see them, she told Yann. That made Yann come sliding out from under the bell. Where? He asked even before he got to his feet. Oh, you've got to peek through the boards. She pointed to the louver boards. Yann drew back. Don't be afraid, Linda mothered him. Linda will hold you. She helped him climb. Yann clung to the boards and peered down between them to the dike. Oh, I'm high, he said, startled. He tried to scramble down, but Linda had both her hands against his back. I'm holding you, she said encouragingly. Do you see them? Yes, and they've got the two storks. They haven't either, Linda said indignantly. The other two are standing in the sea. Do you see them standing in the sea? No, Yann said. It made Linda so impatient with Yann she decided she'd tell Lena. Lena, she called from the tower, you've got the wrong ones. Linda, where are you? Lena's sharp call suddenly penetrated the high loft. I'm here, Linda yelled back. The wind, soughing between the slanting boards, seemed to beat her words back at her. Where? Lena yelled. Where, Linda? Tell me just where you are. I'm up here, and Yann's gone back under the bell. Can't you see me? Under the bell? Lena's words came shrieking back. Are you way up in the tower? Yes, and so is Yann. Linda, is there a piece of stone up there? Go find a piece of stone and hit the bell with it. Hit it hard. Linda looked around the bell loft. There were all kinds of broken stones that had crumbled from the great walls. She picked up the biggest one. She had to lift it with both hands. She staggered to the bell with it, but when she tried to fling it across the bell, it just dropped. It was so heavy. It hit the rim of the bell between her toes. Bong! A great, gross bong came roaring out of the bell. The sound swelled and circled and filled the whole loft. It scared Yann. He came squirming from under the bell. The sound still echoed all around them in the loft. Yann looked up, listening to it. He liked it. He was laughing. It frightened Linda. What she had done. She backed away as far from the bell as possible and ran against one of the openings in the tower. How did you do it, Linda? How did you make it bong? Yann asked. The awed Linda pointed to the big stone. Then Yann picked it up with both hands and hit the bell and hit it again. Bong, bong. Everybody would hear it all over. Now you did it, Linda cried. Everybody heard it. Are you going to get it from your mother? She pointed out the board covering opening as if to prove it. It was so. In all the nearby fields, people stood looking up at the tower. On some of the roads, boys came running. Down one road came a man and two women running toward the tower. The teacher and both their mothers. Now you did it, Linda whispered. Here comes your mother. Yann started to cry. Now Lena shouted from right below the tower. Yann and Linda, stay right there. Don't try to go down. The teacher is coming. Mother is coming. The teacher? Both their mothers? Linda looked desperately around the loft. Your mother is coming too, she told Yann. Oh, you're going to get it? You rang the bell. You did it first, Yann wailed. He began to cry hard. Mouth wide open, crying with all his might, he stumbled to the trap door. He took one horrified look through the opening and down all the ladders in all the deep lofts below. His crying died in his mouth. He backed away from the ladder, but when he turned, he saw the bell and began crying again. Linda cried with him. They both were crying so hard they did not hear the great iron door to the tower open far below them. They did not even hear the teacher and Yella coming up the rickety squeaking ladders until they were in the loft right below. Then it was too late to do anything. The teacher found them sitting side by side on the dusty floor, backs against the bell, crying with all their might. "Well, well," he said, "what a high place to sit and cry, and when there's nothing to cry about. Look, Yella's here too, and Yella and I are going to carry you all the way down Piggyback. Who wants to ride Piggyback?" Linda stopped crying and stretched her arms up to Yella, so Yann would have to ride the big, strange teacher's back. "Just shut your eyes and there'll be nothing to it," the teacher said. Linda obediently shut her eyes. All the way down the ladder she could hear the teacher coming on behind with Jan. The teacher was saying all kinds of nice things to Yann, but Yann just sobbed no to all of the teacher's endless questions. Linda kept her eyes shut. To Linda's amazement, many people had gathered outside the tower. Everybody was asking questions. Everybody was talking at one time. It was bewildering. Now her mother scooped her up and kissed her all over her dirty, dusty face. Yann's mother was doing it too. And nobody was angry, and everybody was talking. Everybody was around except the two white storks. They were lying on the dike. But how could she tell Lena in all this confusion and talk that they were the wrong storks? Her mother was hugging her so tight, and now her mother was carrying her home like a baby. So was Yann's mother carrying him. All the others came on behind, even the teacher. How could she tell Lena anything? But she was ready at the first chance to tell Lena that she and Yella had gone and found the wrong storks. All right, see you in chapter 15.